Alpha is a misnomer. On horses, wolves, the Cold War, and our need to know who is in charge. People often assume, when they visit us for the first time, that owning the farm means I'm naturally the person they should be taking lessons from. At one time, that was true. But as I trudge more and more along the path of becoming a better leader, I've gained valuable insight into what it means to assemble a team. I wear a lot of hats. I'm our bookkeeper, our janitor, our grounds crew. You may normally view me wearing the same old dusty straw hat, sweat-stained and slightly mildewed. I'm wondering if my hair will actually have a chance to dry now that we're moving into the slanting light of autumn. But I'm usually burning my candle at both ends. One of our team members may be better poised to give you their full attention. I'm not always the best person for the job. Coaching and groundwork are my passions. I might have been up all night tending to a horse, but I'm ready to meet you first thing if you have a coaching or a respite session with me in the morning. Some of our staff members specialize in dressage, others are obsessed with Western, some are great with kids, and others love teaching adults. We all have our things. Our curiosity energizes us. The key is figuring out who is the best person for the job at hand. Horses do this too, and we have a lot to learn from them as we migrate away from outdated ideas about leadership, particularly the notion that every group needs a single leader firmly planted at the top. Bentley has a very distinct whinny. He's big and beefy, part Clydesdale, part thoroughbred. And he came into my life at the turn of the millennium when he was shipped down from Canada to find a home after being born as a byproduct of the human hormone replacement drug, Premarin. He started out as the ugliest foal I'd ever seen, but grew into a gorgeous creature with a kind, smart expression and a black, glossy coat. There's an oil painting of him hanging on a wall in a parlor in Europe. Bentley has supermodel energy. You feel his aura before you notice his stature in the field. Most of Bentley's life, he lived in small groups of mares and geldings. Watching him interact with the others, he's been called many things: bossy, aggressive, bold, in charge, dominant. As we settled into the new farm last year, those smaller groups were absorbed into a larger herd that lives together 24/7. This new way of living for the horses erased their high energy associated with going in and out of the stall and the barn each day. Their food became constant and free choice. Their dynamics with each other seldom fluctuated. And there was no longer a need for big energy spikes as everyone vied for resources. Finally, the horses were freed to create their own daily rhythms and patterns. Naturally, I assumed that Bentley would become the dominant horse in his field. If you didn't know any better, you'd think the same thing, watching Bentley nudge the other horses into line, perking up like a stallion if a mare walked past the fence, being the first in line for a snack. Bentley's behavior in the field made me worried that my old buddy Max, 32 years young and my partner in this work since I quit my real jobs and ran to horses at the turn of the millennium, was not long for this world. Bentley was obsessed with Max. He followed Max everywhere in the field, guarding his rear and keeping the other horses away from him. Bentley scrutinized anything that contained Max's scent, a halter or my hands after I'd run them over Max's red, shiny coat. One or two times over the years, Bentley seemed to forecast a sick horse reaching their end before there were any outward signs of disease. He became aggressive and fixated, pinning his ears and trying to attack the horses. So I read his fascination with Max as him fortune-telling my fears. I took solace in knowing that, at the very least, Max was living out his days in a true, comfortable, permanent home. This farm and my entire adult life would not have been possible without him. I was wrong. As the months went by, I watched Bentley stand as a sentry by the gate, waiting for Max to return from the barn where he spends his days under the fans, and we cater to him with meals, treats, and general lovin's. Max still works. He teaches kids how to steer and trot. He takes his job very seriously and is great at it. Bentley would greet his return with low waffles and sighs of relief. He would take his position behind Max's rump and follow him back into the field where the other herd members grazed. During an ice storm last winter, I chose to feed Max a meal in the field instead of risking a long walk across slick ground to the barn. Bentley stood behind Max, keeping watch, warning the other horses away from Max's bowl, and not once attempting to take Max's food. As the season shifted toward summer and long days were punctuated by afternoon storms, I watched Max take the lead, guiding the herd from the shelter to the grass and back again as bands of rain wove through the mist. Max is wise and seasoned. He has lived with small and big herds. He's awesome with new horses, showing them the ropes and ignoring their big emotions. The longer I watched the herd build a strong unit, the more I saw Bentley defer to Max's judgment over and over again. So when Christopher and I were stealing midnight moments outside when he came home from work last week, meaning watching cat videos that I'd saved for him throughout the day, I'd already started realizing that Bentley wasn't top dog. We heard his distinctive, squealing, high-pitched whinny call out from the field. The first time, we ignored it. The second time, we stopped and acknowledged that it was weird to hear him calling out in the night. The third time, we went into motion and made our way quickly to the field. The boys were all calm and grazing, all together in a clump near the graveyard. We walked alongside them and watched their motions. Friday positioned himself behind Max, trying to catch some good gnat whisking from Max's tail. Bentley moved like a wedge, untangling Friday from Max's rump. He did this several times. Occasionally, Max would stop grazing and stand still as a statue, his ears perked towards the dark horizon. He studied something out there that we couldn't see. Beyond the oaks and the old fence posts, Max noticed a threat and studied it casually, trying to figure out if there would be a problem. And Bentley's job was to keep Friday from sticking his nose up Max's butt, so Max had all his resources available to gain intel. They each had a task. I don't know about Friday. He's glorious, but also oblivious. He's learning slowly how to horse, but most of the time he encounters the world as a human would, short-sighted, flimsy, and frustrated at the flies. As Christopher and I walked alongside them, just studying their movements and assuring ourselves that their concerns had passed, I realized more and more that the leadership position I had always assigned to Bentley masked the nurturing care of a worried mother figure. I'd read his concern as dominance, when in fact it was insecurity. And dang, don't we do that all the time with the humans we encounter? With their shiny bravado and big presence? Each week, I'll be adding a little gift section for my paid subscribers. The essay picks up for all readers after this break, so keep scrolling. But if you'd like to support the farm and the horses and get a little peek behind the scenes of our daily life, go back to the main essay and click the link and help us steward this land and the domesticated and wild creatures who live here. I'll have links to all of this in the show notes. And if you normally listen to us from a podcast platform or from the voiceover of the original essay, just make sure you're clicking somewhere in the middle of the original post, and you will have access, if you're a paid subscriber, to a tiny gift each week behind the scenes. Psych! In 1970, David Mech published the hugely influential The Wolf, The Ecology and Behavior of an Endangered Species. From that book, one term escaped the confines of wolf biology and made its way deep into our collective vocabulary. Alpha. Alpha wolf became an explanation for how we believe social animals organize themselves. Someone rose to the top, someone was in charge, and everyone else fell into place beneath them. We structured society around this framework. We applied it to home, to work, and to so many other human organizational structures. But after he published his book, Mech kept watching the wolves and noticed that the behavior of wild wolves was very different from the highly emotional, resource-guarding behavior seen in captivity. His original work included wild wolves, but some of the scientific framework available to interpret what he was seeing had been built from earlier studies of captive wolves living in artificial groups. Over the next 30 years after publication of his book, Mech continued studying wolves in the wild and gained better opportunities to observe how natural packs actually functioned. Then he did something very few people do after producing the scientific equivalent of a hit record. He admitted that he had been wrong and set about correcting his earlier conclusions. But by then, alpha had already escaped the zoo. Humans had taken the term and run with it, and most of us weren't interested in reading the revised memo. Alpha fit too neatly into the story we told about ourselves. It gave scientific cover to a world organized around strength, rank, competition, and the conviction that somebody had to come out on top. We weren't about to give up being top dog simply because the wolves had never been playing the game beside us. Someone has to be in charge. The 1970s and 1980s were an ideal era to coin the term alpha because the world was structured around dominance theory. The United States and the Soviet Union were at the top of the food chain, each spying on the other to exploit a moment of weakness. During the Cold War, nuclear weapons existed in sufficient numbers to destroy civilization many times over, and the powers behind the scenes, keeping everyone alive, were built upon dominance and deterrence. You won't attack me because I can hurt you worse. I grew up in a time of fallout shelters and hostage situations. Soviet troops invaded Afghanistan while American and Soviet submarines carried nuclear missiles invisibly beneath the oceans. In 1983, audiences watched the day after while imagining nuclear war arriving in Kansas. Reagan called the Soviet Union an evil empire as he announced the Strategic Defense Initiative and presided over an enormous military buildup. Outward strength was presented as the thing standing between ordinary life and annihilation. We used language such as superpower, superiority, deterrence, escalation, submission, containment, command, and control. There were two sides, and somebody had to win. Weakness meant death. We didn't allow the other guy to gain ground. We maintained control. In daily life, our institutions function the same way. Corporations had presidents at the top and workers at the bottom. The military had a chain of command. Schools had principals. Families were still emerging from generations in which the father was presumed to be the head of the household. Success meant climbing the ladder, and authority flowed downward. Even popular entertainment gave us an endless succession of men proving themselves through toughness. Rocky, Rambo, Top Gun. Ronald Reagan himself cultivated the image of the American cowboy, riding horseback on his ranch with his boots and bravado, while promising everyone that America was on the path to becoming strong and confident again. This structure stood on the belief that someone had to be in charge, so naturally we applied this to the wolves we watched in captivity. We hadn't begun questioning the nuances of power in environments. When life told us that someone had to be in charge, it wasn't a stretch to believe the wolves lived this way too. Alpha was at the top, and beneath him were progressively subordinate animals. The clear lines of rank maintained order, while strength established positions. Challenge threatened position. The successful leader controlled the group. We looked into nature and saw the Cold War looking back at us. The rise of natural horsemanship. Ronald Reagan didn't convince Americans to dominate their horses. Instead, this horse cultural phenomenon called natural horsemanship hit the scene right smack in the middle of the Cold War, coinciding with the moment that we came to believe that wolves had an alpha leading their pack. We were exquisitely prepared to believe our problems with any species would be solved if we worked on becoming a better, stronger, more dominant leader. I think Pat Pirelli is a world-class dork. He hit the horse scene with his branding and in-chargeness at the time when I was busy running away from human hierarchies that sheltered abuses and the great pyramid scheme of the churches I was raised in. The last thing I wanted was some dude telling me that playing games with my horses would make me their chosen leader. I also hate board games and group fun. I'm the kid with no siblings that you'll find sitting in the corner as I keep score with my notebook. What I will give Pat Pirelli is that he coined the term natural horsemanship. He put his logo on centuries of practical skills, pulling them out of context and condensing them down for the average horse owner who didn't have enough time in the day nor the experience to quell their fears through experimentation and patience. Pirelli was a hit with middle-aged horse owners. I am now a middle-aged horse owner. I get it. Pirelli became the charismatic face of natural horsemanship, while he and his wife and business partner Linda transformed it into an international phenomenon. It's telling that after their marriage and partnership unraveled 3 decades later, Linda walked away from the empire they had built and began developing a new approach centered on connection, psychology, and the horse's happiness. But let's talk about how Pat Pirelli inherited the framework for his empire. Natural horsemanship didn't begin with Pat Pirelli in 1980. Its modern American roots trace back to Tom and Bill Dorrance and Ray Hunt, Western horsemen who had been traveling around giving clinics to the likes of Pirelli for a long time. Before Dorrance and Hunt, the seeds of natural horsemanship had been deposited in America by settlers from Spain and Portugal. Before them, the information traveled through cavalries in Europe. Before them, the Romans turned dominance into an art form and brutalized their war horses into submission. Before the Romans, the Greeks worked to gain understanding of human and animal nature. Before the Greeks, the Sumerians codified horsemanship lessons that bear a strong resemblance to the slower art of noticing that we're returning to today. When Ray Hunt and Tom Dorrance traveled around teaching riders how to pay attention to the horse in the 1970s and 80s, we were finally beginning to challenge the hard traditions we had inherited. We were ready to begin paying attention again, thousands of years later, to hazy things like feel, timing, balance, pressure, release, and what the horse was trying to tell us before we became so busy trying to tell the horse what to do. Pat Pirelli developed his program in 1982 and began teaching clinics in 1984. He dates coining the term natural horsemanship to 1991. In time, he organized the elusive concepts such as feel and communication into games, levels, exercises, specialized equipment, and a system packaged for horse owners to take home and practice. Other clinicians followed their own variations, and natural horsemanship stopped being one man's idea and became an entire movement built around the appealing promise that we could learn to speak the horse's own language rather than keep trying to force the horse to speak ours. It was, in many ways, a tremendous improvement in how ordinary people thought about horses. But somewhere between the old horsemen asking us to pay closer attention and an industry trying to explain exactly why these new methods worked, the language of partnership became tangled up with the language of hierarchy. By the time natural horsemanship became systematized and commercially enormous in the 1980s and 90s, phrases like establish leadership, control his feet, don't let him win, make him respect your space, and become the leader your horse needs didn't require a radical new understanding of social relationships. That sounded like the world we already knew. And then, almost absurdly, while horse people were learning to become the alpha, the actual Cold War ended. The Berlin Wall came down in 1989, and the Soviet Union disappeared in 1991. The neat two-superpower map we'd spent decades believing was simply the way the world worked vanished almost overnight. The wolves hadn't changed. The horses hadn't changed. Our world had. But ideas don't disappear just because the world that made them intuitive has moved on. Sometimes they become the most powerful after we've forgotten where they come from. And in the horse world, Alpha was about to have one hell of a second act, which is crazy because the whole point of the movement was to teach people how to pay closer attention to what was in front of them. The radical idea behind natural horsemanship, the revolution that began before marketing took over, was that humans needed to stop assuming horses were trying to be deliberately difficult. If we stepped back and looked at the horse objectively, we might realize that we were the ones who needed to change. What happened instead was that we became so certain that we understood what horses were telling us that we stopped asking them to show us anything. If we're the natural-born leaders, everyone else just needs to get in line. If we're the dominant species, there is no longer any need to follow the evidence and search for a better answer. Justice for Julian. Julian, like Pat Pirelli, is a world-class dork. He's a chestnut gelding that spends his days in the girls' pasture by the barn. If there is trouble, this horse will find it. I blame him for everything that goes wrong, and most of the time, I am right. However, I'm still apologizing to him for what happened the other week. Let me explain. No matter how many notes I place on a whiteboard, if I walk away from the barn for an hour, horses end up in weird spots. I've reseeded a portion of the girls' field, and the lush grass is taped off from a sacrifice area where they eat their hay in the evening. Technically, Julian and his harem of 2 bay mares are given access to the greenery for the better part of the day. But on this particular day, Moose, who absolutely does not need lush grass, and Pepper, Moose's accomplice, were turned out with Julian and his ladies when I wasn't looking. The field was crowded. The mares were coming into season. Tensions were high. I heard a lot of hollering in the vicinity of their field, so I went down to investigate. What I found was Pepper dripping with sweat, Julian baring his teeth, and what appeared to be Julian charging and attacking Pepper. Over the course of the next hour, I threatened to inflict bodily harm on Julian in a lot of creative ways as I tried to herd him away from the gate and give a clear path for Pepper to escape back into the safety of the loafing area. I rued the day Julian was born. I was mad that I'd made a big push to confiscate him in the battlefield of my divorce from my ex-husband, who wanted to keep him. I doubted my entire career path and at one point stopped intervening entirely so that nature could take its course. And then in the most anticlimactic way, Julian backed off and I was able to get a halter on Pepper. I led her to the barn for the night so she could have a peaceful place to rest and recover. Oddly, she didn't settle down when I placed her in the stall. She paced and called out for the other horses. Julian was fine. He was calm and happy and just munched hay like nothing had happened. The next morning, I took Pepper back out to her field. She began immediately calling out. She pulled against the lead rope in my hand, trying to get to Julian. Julian saw her coming and snuck behind the mountain of moose, the big bay mare, hoping that Pepper couldn't see him. He literally was hiding. And then it all made sense to me. Julian hadn't been attacking Pepper the night before. He was trying to tell her no, and Pepper, with her hormones flaring, had not taken his no for an answer. The whole time, Julian was the victim, but I was so determined in my foundational belief of male dominance and female obedience that I couldn't see the truth of the encounter through my projections. There is no set hierarchy in the field. The horses trade roles depending on what is happening and who has the best idea at the moment. Their motivations, trust, and environment are the deciding factors. And here we are, walking up with our flags and sticks, waving our hands about and expecting full compliance. If I had stood back and observed what was happening in the field before rushing in to demand a solution, the evidence would have led me to a better outcome. Humans are odd little creatures. Revising the story. And horses trade roles within their hierarchies. Put a pile of delicious hay into a field and watch who is willing to move the other out of the way to get it. Researchers call these dominance relationships, and the title is pretty accurate. Who knows what we'll discover in the future? Where we've erred is mistaking dominance for leadership. The horse who gets the first choice of hay isn't always the horse the herd trusts when it's time to move in the field. The horse pushing all the others away from the gate may miss the fact that something dangerous is happening along the fence line. Researchers studying collective movement in horses have found that leadership is distributed among the group, with different horses initiating movements at different times rather than a single designated leader making all the calls. And the horses have figured all this out without attending a single leadership seminar. In the case of Bentley calling out in the night and Julian aggressively calling the shots with Pepper, I misunderstood what I was experiencing. I made assumptions based on my limited understanding. I thought I knew what was happening, but in both cases, I was wrong. I followed the wrong leader. Bentley was playing wingman to the dude in command, and Pepper wasn't trying to get away from Julian. She pursued him. I saw a male aggressor and a subservient female, and my job as the human was to step in and save them all. The next morning, I had a chance to see what was happening with Pepper. I took it all in better because my emotions weren't high and the horses were relatively settled. Pepper pulled against the lead rope while my tired alpha gelding hid his entire chestnut self behind moose. David Mech had wolves on Ellesmere Island. I had Julian hiding behind a mare. The scale of our scientific contributions differs somewhat, but the problem was the same. We had looked at an animal, interpreted what we saw through a framework we already believed, and then been given new information that made the old explanation pointless. Mech changed his mind. I owed Julian an apology. And maybe that is the piece of all of this that matters more to me than whether we continue using the word alpha, whether natural horsemanship survives another generation, or whether somebody somewhere is still spending a Saturday afternoon moving a horse's feet around a round pen to establish leadership. We will always bring ourselves into the pasture. We bring our childhoods and our politics and our marriages and our churches and our workplaces. We bring whatever we were taught at a clinic in 1994. We bring the books we read, the trainers we admire, and the things that worked once and therefore became truth forever. We bring every hierarchy we have ever survived and everyone we have benefited from. Then we stand at the fence looking at another species while convincing ourselves that we're simply observing nature. We aren't. We are observing ourselves through nature. That doesn't make observation useless, but it does make curiosity essential. The answer isn't to replace the old alpha pyramid with another absolute proclamation that horses don't have dominance or hierarchy, because that wouldn't be paying attention either. Horses move one another. They compete. They have preferences and alliances and grudges and friendships, and some of them can be spectacular assholes about hay. Julian remains a world-class dork, and I reserve the right to blame him for whatever happens tomorrow. But 26 years after I quit my real jobs to become a professional horse person, I am becoming considerably less interested in deciding who is in charge. I want to know who knows something. I want to know who is being followed and why. I want to know who is frightened, who is curious, who needs space, who wants company, who notices something the rest of us have missed. Is the horse standing in front of me actually fitting the story I've been giving him in my mind? I want to be able to change the story, to see new details, and to never stop looking. Natural horsemanship, as it was presented in its early days, gave us a simple template. Pay attention to the horse. Julian, world-class dork that he is still trying to teach me how. Love, Kim.